we think of the word murder, it mostly always makes us feel a certain way within ourselves, which is understandable, given the nature of what it involves. Intentionally taking the life of another human being comes easy to some, difficult for others, but near impossible for the many. Committing this act in modern-day Britain will guarantee a life sentence, but a release day is almost always guaranteed. However, if this act was committed during this specific time in Britain, if proven, would mean very bad news for the defendant involved. Our case begins on August 23rd, 1960. 25-year-old Keith Godfrey Arthur's body was found in a farmhouse near Dunstable Downs, bordering Kensworth, on August 25th, 1960. His body had reportedly been there for 2 days before he was found. He was found to have died from a gunshot wound to the neck, though lack of blood around the body, police were certain he was killed somewhere else. Police assumed the killer was a local man, as he would have had to have known the area in order to dump the body where it was discovered. Keith Arthur lived at Morecambe Road in Dunstable in the Downside estate. On August 23rd, he had visited the home of Jack and Margaret Day in Edward Street, also Dunstable. However, Jack was at work at this time. It was thought that the pair hadn't seen each other for some time. Jack had returned later that day and saw Keith in his living room talking to Margaret. Jack allegedly said to Keith, "What are you doing here?" To which Keith replied, "I came to see if you would buy me a drink, Jack." It is alleged at this moment that Jack pulled out a .38 revolver from his pocket and shot Keith in the neck from only 9 inches away, suggesting the gunshot as up close and personal, and fitting with the court's story that Jack was accusing him of being too friendly with his wife. It seems as though it was the testimony of a 13-year-old girl, babysitter and witness to the crime, Patricia Dowling, that led to a conviction, inevitably sending Jack Day to the gallows on March 29, 1961. I had known about this story for some time, even though it happened decades before my time. Only recently have I questioned the events and wondered if there was a possibility that Jack Day was innocent. Well, as innocent as a man could be, having killed someone. Keith was supposedly being too friendly with Margaret Day, but Keith himself had a wife and 2 children. I also read recently that he had a 3rd child on the way during this incident. Keith was showing Margaret a bracelet on his wrist in the living room. He was a confident man and was said to enjoy bragging. Jack was said to be a gun fanatic, reportedly owning up to 200 antique firearms spanning a number of years. Nowadays in the UK, that would mean a life sentence on its own. However, Jack was known for carrying a gun all the time back then, as the laws were very different. The only punishment he faced was that he was fined twice for not having a gun license. He also owned a selection of swords and daggers, and I believe that this on its own would have greatly harmed any defense that Jack tried to use. Though Keith was a bragger and confident, it is said that Jack's friends knew that he carried a gun, so they were always careful of going near Margaret, which makes me doubt that Keith was the only one that had no worry of going near Jack's wife. After all, even a bragger isn't bulletproof. During the investigation, the police had found a blood trail from the bottom of Regent Street in the town centre, leading to Jack's home in Edward Street. These streets are poorly lit to this day, and it's possible that the lighting was worse back in 1960. When detectives looked there, they were greeted by a woman who was reportedly laughing and joking with the Scotland Yard detective because the initial blood trail turned out to be paint. She then told them to talk to her daughter Patricia, mentioned earlier, as she believed she witnessed the murder. This sticks out because if the female resident heard that, I couldn't think of anyone that wouldn't call the police in that moment. This would have been 3 days after the witness to the shooting. Jack Day was apprehended at the Horse and Jockey pub while enjoying a game of darts, which leads me to Jack's version of events that took place. He had claimed that he hadn't seen Keith for some time and said hello to him when he saw him. He then took off his jacket and went to put his gun on the sofa, which then supposedly went off, hitting Keith in the neck. He was alleged to have told Jack, "It has got me in the throat." Jack said it looked like a scratch, and that he had given him a handkerchief to cover the wound. He had then walked with Keith, supporting him down Regent Street towards the town centre to get help, as he started bleeding heavily from his neck. I think it was clear at this point that the bullet severed an artery. He then said that he panicked when his friend collapsed. I read that Jack claimed he walked Keith back to the home, but it's unclear exactly where he collapsed. Panicking and not knowing what to do, he used his car to take his friend's body to the farmhouse. I feel this is important because I can't see a man shooting someone, then escorting him to a busy town centre where he would have been guaranteed to be seen since they were both known locally. Keith likely would have bled out in minutes, so it would have been easy to overpower him and keep him in the home. He would have lost strength fast from the blood loss. Margaret's versions of events said that she was talking to Keith and saw him suddenly grab his throat like he was having a fit, but that she heard no gunshot. I doubt this statement is true, considering it's fairly obvious that Jack shot Keith at this point, whether accidental or not. I walked the length of the street in order for you to see where the two friends had walked. From the actual house where it happened, it doesn't take long to reach the town centre, and as you could see when we get to the end, that there would be witnesses. The road in the town centre is High Street North, formerly known as Watling Street, and I would argue the town was more lively back in 1960. We still had plenty of pubs, and no shops were closed and boarded shut. This is close to what High Street North would have looked like in 1960. Jack was charged with capital murder. While incarcerated, he was advised to plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Medical professionals claimed that Jack wasn't insane, but that he did have the mind of a child. So I would certainly believe he could be reckless with the gun, but that still doesn't suggest the intention of taking Keith's life. The medical professional was giving evidence in Jack's defense for 3 hours, supposedly maintaining the whole time that killing Keith was an accident. Jack was nonetheless convicted of murder and sentenced to death. He had initially refused to file for a reprieve of his death sentence, stating that he didn't because he was innocent of the charges against him. He wouldn't let his family visit him in prison, and it is said that he maintained his courage the whole time he was in there. He then changed his mind and filed for a reprieve, because if he was in fact innocent, then that is literally the only thing that would save his life. A newspaper had published an article stated Jack Day had already been executed before the due date, so he filed a lawsuit against them, stating that this would ruin any chance of a reprieve. It went nowhere, however, as his reprieve was denied after all, and he was informed that his lawsuit would die with him. On March 29, 1961, Jack was escorted to the gallows to meet his end at Bedford Prison. His last words were to the hangman, Harry Allen, and they were alleged to have been, "I'm sorry I did it. I really didn't want to kill him." When a man knows his time is up, he has no possible reason for his last words to be a lie. There was nothing else for Jack to lose at this point. My only issue with the death penalty is that you can't fix the mistake of executing an innocent person. Though I can only speculate on this case, as all witnesses have either passed away or left the town. If Jack did in fact kill his friend by accident, then I would say this hanging was unlawful. My personal view, though, Jack didn't mean to kill Keith, and this execution was not necessary.